On the evening of 12th November 2022, Ethan Chapin and Xana Kernodle were at the Sigma Chi house on the University of Idaho campus till approximately 1:45 in the morning. Kaylee Gonsalves and Madison Mogan spent the evening at a local bar and got a lift home at approximately 1:56 a.m. All residents of the house were home by 2 a.m. and in their rooms by 4 a.m. Xana received a DoorDash at approximately 4 a.m. One of their housemates, DM, was woken from sleep in her bedroom at approximately 4 a.m. by what sounded like Kaylee playing with her dog in the third-floor bedroom. Shortly after, DM said she thought she heard Kaylee say something to the effect of, "There's someone here." DM looked out of her bedroom upon hearing "there's someone here," but saw no one. She opened her door again to look outside when she thought she heard crying coming from Xana's bedroom. At this time, she heard a male voice say something to the effect of, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." We know Xana was awake and using TikTok on her mobile at 4:12 a.m., so, presumably, the attack occurred after this time. At 4:17 a.m., a security camera less than 50 feet from Xana's bedroom at 1112 King Road picked up what sounded like voices or a whimper followed by a loud thud. A dog can also be heard barking on this security camera at this time. DM opened her door a third time after hearing the crying and saw a black-clad figure wearing a mask covering their nose and mouth walking toward her. This is the view from DM's open doorway facing towards the living room, where she would have seen the perpetrator walking towards her and leaving the latent footprint outlined in red on the floor. She described this person as 5 feet 10 inches or taller, male, not very muscular, but athletically built with bushy eyebrows. She reports the male walked past her towards the sliding doors. This is the view in the daytime as you walk from the living room towards DM's bedroom on the left and the kitchen and exit on the right-hand side. Crucially, during daytime this is all quite clear and visible. However, in the dark it is easier to see how the combination of the neon sign on the right, the dark unlit corridor, and the narrow opening of DM's bedroom door could make it very difficult to appreciate DM if one were in a hurry leaving the house after, say, murdering 4 people, as she stood in a frozen shock phase. She then locked the door to her room and stayed inside. A latent shoe print was found outside DM's door. It showed a diamond pattern shape and is consistent with DM's statement. I'd like to thank Gray Hughes Investigates for their kind permission to use their excellent 3D model of the King House and their renderings of the first-person perspective of the perpetrator. Here we see the representation of the perpetrator entering the house. He reaches the foot of the stairs and then proceeds up the U-shaped stairs. Upon reaching the upstairs landing, he turns right and enters the room in which Madison and Kaylee were sleeping. After he commits his crimes there, he then leaves this room and proceeds down the stairs again towards the second floor. Now on the second floor, he proceeds through the living room and towards the bedroom on the left in which Xana and Ethan were sleeping. He assaults both of them in this bedroom and then leaves the bedroom to return again towards the living room. He passes DM without seeing her and then makes his way into the kitchen and from the kitchen out via the sliding doors through which he entered. At this point, we feel it's important to note that Kohberger stated that he suffered from visual snow syndrome in his teenage years. Visual snow syndrome is a neurological disorder which results in disturbances of vision. It is also associated quite commonly with night blindness. The pictures on the screen now show how night blindness can affect people. The picture on the left is of someone with normal vision, and the picture on the right is what someone with significant night blindness would see. We think this is crucial for explaining the mystery of why DM also wasn't assaulted that night. This picture from inside the house shows the view that the perpetrator would have had from the living room facing towards DM's bedroom. DM's bedroom is on the left, and the exit towards the sliding door in the kitchen is on the right. From this perspective, it is very difficult to understand how DM was not spotted. However, when we looked at it again in nighttime conditions, with the good vibes neon sign in our eyes, it is easier to see how DM's bedroom door being slightly ajar could be missed. Now, we have adjusted the picture even more to account for night blindness, and suddenly it becomes almost impossible to see DM's door being slightly ajar, especially with the neon light taking most of our attention. We think that this might explain why DM wasn't assaulted. A combination of stress, adrenaline, and night blindness may have combined to save her life that night. On November 13th, 2022, at approximately 4 p.m., Corporal Brett Payne, a law enforcement officer with the Moscow Police Department in Idaho, and Sergeant Blaker arrived at King House and documented Zana was laying on the floor, deceased with wounds caused by an edged weapon. Ethan Chaplin was also laying there, deceased, with sharp force injuries. On the third floor, in Kayla Gonsalves's bedroom, Kaylee and Madison were laying deceased in the single bed in the room. Both had visible stab wounds. Corporal Payne reports that he also saw a tan leather knife sheath laying on the bed next to Mogan's right side. The sheet had K-Bar, USMC, and the United States Marine Corps Eagle, Globe and Anchor insignia stamped on the outside of it. A video canvas of surveillance videos from nearby houses, businesses and roads was conducted in order to locate suspects or suspect vehicles in the vicinity of King House. This showed a White Elantra without front license plates travelling west of Indian Hills Drive at 3:26 a.m. and westbound on Steiner Avenue at Idaho State Highway 95 at 3:28 a.m. From 3:29 to 4:20 a.m., this vehicle was seen passing by King House on 3 occasions and finally leaving via Walenta Drive. This road is not heavily trafficked, especially at this time of night, and so this represents highly anomalous behaviour. The vehicle can be seen entering the area a fourth time at 4:04 a.m., driving east on King Road, stopping and turning around in front of 500 Queen Road, and then driving back westbound on King Road. It attempted to unsuccessfully turn around or park in front of King House, and then continued to the intersection of Queen Road and King Road, where it did a 3-point turn and drove eastbound down Queen Road again. It is then seen speeding away from King House at 4:20 a.m. It travelled south on Walenta Drive and likely exited at Palouse River Drive and Conestoga Drive. From there, it appears it travelled to Pullman, Idaho. An FBI forensic examiner identified the vehicle in this footage as a white 2011 to 2016 Hyundai Elantra. Later, after reviewing footage from Washington State University and the Pullman region, this same vehicle was spotted on several occasions from 2:44 a.m. to 5:25 a.m., and the forensic examiner narrowed his identification down to a white 2014 to 2016 Hyundai Elantra. On November 25th, Moscow Police Department asked law enforcement to be on the lookout for white Hyundai Elantras. At 12:28 a.m. on 29th November, Washington State University police officers Daniel Tiengo and Curtis Whitman queried white Elantras registered at Washington State University and identified a 2015 white Elantra registered to Bryan Kohberger, residing at 1630 Northeast Valley Road, apartment 201, Pullman, Washington. This is 3/4 of a mile from the last camera which picked up the white Elantra on the night of the murders. The car had Pennsylvania plates LFZ 8649. It is notable that Pennsylvania doesn't require front license plates. Corporal Brett Payne then investigated and saw that Kohberger's license details matched DM's description and that he had bushy eyebrows. On November 18th, Kohberger registered his 2015 white Elantra with Washington State and later received Washington State plate CFB 8708. There could be innocent explanations for this, but given his arrest, one has to wonder if Kohberger wanted new plates and, crucially, front plates in an effort to avoid his White Elantra being identified as being of interest to the police. On 21st August 2022, Kohberger was detained as part of a traffic stop by Idaho County Sheriff's Deputy Corporal Huux. As part of the stop, he gave his mobile phone number, a number ending in 8548. In the affidavit, this is referred to as the 8548 phone, so we'll use that sobriquet also. Investigators got a search warrant to check if the 8548 phone was in range of cellular towers near the King House from 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. on November 13, 2022. It did not show the phone using cellular towers near the house between those times. Criminals are aware of cellular tower-based cell phone tracking and therefore frequently turn their phones off when committing crimes. However, two things still trip them up. Firstly, they may omit to turn off the phone during reconnaissance of the scene or dry runs of the crime. And secondly, even if they do turn the phone off, the very act of uncharacteristically turning a phone off during the precise time of a crime they are suspected of committing can be very illuminating for investigators. Accordingly, another search warrant for cellular tower-based cell phone tracking was obtained on December 22, 2022 for the time from 12 a.m. on November 12th to 12 a.m. on November 14th, the day before and the day after the crime. The investigators consulted with the FBI CAST unit, the Cellular Analysis Survey team, who determined that between 2:42 a.m. and 2:47 a.m., the 8548 phone registered to Bryan Kohberger left his residence and travelled south through Pullman. At 2:47 a.m., the phone was either switched off or put in airplane mode and disappeared from the cellular network. It was only turned on again at 4:48 a.m. near the Blaine portion of Highway 95 and was tracked back to the area of Kohberger's residence by 5:30 a.m. These phone movements are consistent with the movements of the White Elantra spotted on multiple surveillance videos previously mentioned. This evidence ties the registered owner of the phone, Bryan Kohberger, to the White Elantra seen acting suspiciously in the vicinity of King House at the time of the murders. On December 23, 2022, this evidence was used to apply for a search warrant for Kohberger's historical cellular tower-based cell phone tracking from June 23, 2022, the date the phone was purchased by Kohberger, onwards. We are interested to note that the 8548 phone is registered with AT&T, as AT&T cellular tower-based cell phone tracking is much more vague than other carriers. While many will provide a bearing and distance, AT&T's tracking will only provide law enforcement with a general direction, say southwest, with no distance. This makes cellular tower-based tracking of AT&T phones much less precise and useful to law enforcement. It'll be interesting to see whether this was part of Kohberger's decision matrix for his phone purchase in June. As a cloud forensics specialist, it is difficult to imagine he would be unaware of this detail. The 8548 phone connected to cellular towers near King House on at least 12 occasions prior to 13th November 2022. All but one of these occasions was in the late evening or early morning hours. This is a very unusual pattern, to say the least. In fact, we would even go so far as to say it is a damning pattern if the cellular tower-based cell phone tracking data holds up to defense challenges. This search warrant also provided evidence that on the date that Kohberger was stopped by Idaho County Sheriff's Deputy Corporal Huux in August, the 8548 phone had been in the King House area just minutes prior to the stop. This links the 8548 phone to Kohberger and links Kohberger to King House via the phone's location in August, many months before the murders. It also speaks to premeditation. Again, on November 13th, after the murders, at 12:46 p.m., the 8548 phone was located in the region of Albertson's grocery store at 400 Bridge Street, Clarkston, Washington. External surveillance footage shows Kohberger exit a White Elantra at that time, while internal surveillance footage shows Kohberger inside the store, purchase items, and leave at 1:04 p.m. This links the 8548 phone to Kohberger and the White Elantra after the murders. The Idaho State Lab later located a single source of male DNA left on the button snap of the knife sheath. On December 27, 2022, Pennsylvania law enforcement recovered trash from the Kohberger family home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. On December 28, a DNA profile obtained from the trash was compared to the DNA recovered on the knife sheath found at the crime scene. This DNA identified a male as not being excluded as the biological father of suspect profile. At least 99.998% of the male population would be expected to be excluded from the possibility of being the suspect's biological father. That's quite a complicated sentence. So let's break it down to explain it. What they are saying in plain English is that they recovered Bryan Kohberger's father's DNA from the trash and found that the odds that he is the father or grandfather of the killer are very high. How high? Well, in any random sample of 800,000 men, they'd only find one other similar match. Assuming half of the US population is biologically male, there should be roughly 166 million males in America. Even if we don't remove those too young to be parents and have a son of an age able to physically commit murders, only about 200 men in total would be a match for the knife sheath's DNA. How is this testing done? It is achieved by Y chromosome DNA testing. It is a sex-linked chromosome and is therefore not present in women. The Y chromosome is passed down from grandfather to father to son, and so on, in an unbroken line of patrilineal inheritance. Simply put, there are two types of Y chromosome DNA testing: the YSNP test and the YSTR test. The SNP test provides evidence about very ancient ancestry, on the order of thousands of years, while the STR test provides evidence about recent ancestry within the last few hundred years. It provides evidence of the patrilineal line of your ancestry, your father, your paternal grandfather, your paternal great-grandfather, etc. It provides no evidence about your matrilineal male lineage. So, in this case, the YSTR test on the abandoned DNA in the trash showed an extremely high likelihood that the suspect's father, paternal grandfather, or paternal great-grandfather lived at the Albrightsville address. This proved sufficient to arrest Bryan Kohberger when combined with the other evidence available. The equivalent for matrilineal lines is mitochondrial DNA. Some of you may not be familiar with what abandoned DNA is, so we think it will be useful to review it and the legal complexities around its use. Abandoned DNA is any amount of human tissue capable of DNA analysis separated from an individual inadvertently or involuntarily, but not by police coercion. So long as the police don't coerce you to give a sample, they can obtain your DNA from a cup you drink from, a handhold you used on the bus or train, your trash which you voluntarily throw out, an item of clothing you forget, or an envelope you have licked. Crucially, abandoned DNA is not protected by the Fourth Amendment, which protects people from unreasonable searches and seizures by law enforcement. One of our favourite examples of abandoned DNA being used was an inventive trap created by Seattle police to catch a murderer called John Athan in 2003. He had long been suspected of murdering a person in 1982, but they had no DNA sample from him to match to the case. So, they wrote to him from a fictitious law firm, asking him to join a class action lawsuit to recover overcharged traffic fines. He replied, licked the return envelope to close it, and thus provided the detectives with an abandoned DNA sample. They tested the DNA in the saliva, matched to the case, and got their man. It appears that Kohberger was aware of the risk of abandoned DNA being taken as, during law enforcement surveillance while in Pennsylvania, he was seen going outside at 4 a.m. one morning to place trash bags in a neighbour's bin and wearing gloves while he cleaned his car inside and out, not missing an inch. Once in custody, Bryan Kohberger's own DNA can be taken and an exact match to the DNA on the knife sheath can be tested for. Given the evidence made public in the affidavit, it appears likely that Bryan Kohberger's DNA will prove to be a match for the knife sheath's DNA. 28-year-old Bryan Christopher Kohberger of Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, was taken into custody by an FBI SWAT team and Pennsylvania State Police at his parents' house in Monroe County, Pennsylvania on 30th December 2022. Kohberger was arrested on 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 felony count of burglary. He was appointed a public defender and detained without bond at the Monroe County Correctional Facility in Pennsylvania. Apparently, when Kohberger was arrested, he asked, "Do you have anybody else in custody?" While people in shock say many strange things, it doesn't strike us as the most obvious rejoinder of an innocent man. Were we arrested for a crime we didn't commit, none of us would be concerned about whom else they had arrested. We'd be shocked and angry at being suspected, along with a modicum of fear for the prospect of the upcoming interrogation and, possibly, trial. After Kohberger's arrest, there was a delay in releasing information about him and the reason law enforcement arrested him. This is due to the law in Idaho which prevents the release of a probable cause affidavit until the suspect is in custody in Idaho. This information gap was filled by speculation and rumour, as information gaps always are. Meanwhile, in custody, Kohberger waived his right to counsel and agreed to be interviewed. The interview is reported to have lasted 5 to 10 minutes. Once asked about the murders in Idaho, he asked for an attorney and terminated the interview. This is interesting because it shows that Kohberger recognized the difference between an interview and an interrogation, and once the discussion became more like an interrogation, he clammed up. Many reports have spoken about his high opinion of himself. Speaking to the police without a lawyer present is highly inadvisable under any circumstances. We wonder if he arrogantly thought he could still bluff his way out of the situation initially, and only realized the extent of the evidence against him when he began being interrogated. We are very interested to see this video once it is released, and will analyze it on this channel. If you are finding this video educational and interesting, please like it and consider subscribing to our Crime and Psychiatry channel for future updates on this case and our coverage of other forensic psychiatry cases. He agreed to be extradited and was extradited on January 4th, 2023 and taken to Latah County Jail in Idaho. He appeared in Latah County Court on 5th January 2023 where he was charged. Let's examine the charges in greater detail. Why was Kohberger charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and a felony burglary charge? Well, the murder charges were first-degree because it is believed the murders were premeditated, as shown by the cell phone evidence of his reconnaissance runs. The burglary charge is a felony burglary charge because the burglary was committed in order to commit felonies, the murders. Idaho is one of 27 states with the death penalty in America. 8 prisoners are currently on death row, with the last execution occurring a decade ago. This means that Kohberger could face the death penalty if and when he goes to trial. Rather strangely, Kohberger has opted to have a public defender defend him. I say strangely because, as a criminology student, he should be aware that while 76% of defendants with a private lawyer are convicted, 88% of those with a public defender are convicted in America. Not only that, but those defended by a public defender tend to get more severe sentences. Those 2 facts would worry us were we in his position. Kohberger's lawyer has stated that Mr. Kohberger is eager to be exonerated of these charges and looks forward to resolving these matters as promptly as possible. So, what do we know about Kohberger? He was born November 21st, 1994. He lived in Pennsylvania while at community college and university. Shortly after finishing Pleasant Valley High School in 2013, he attended Monroe Career and Technical Institute in Bartonville, but dropped out. He was awarded an associate degree in psychology from Northampton Community College in Bethlehem in 2018. After graduating, he worked as a security guard for the Pleasant Valley School District. Kohberger attended DeSalle University, receiving a criminal justice BA in 2020 and an MA in 2022. While at DeSalle University, he conducted online research into how emotions and psychological traits influence decision-making when committing a crime, posting as criminology student on Reddit. He was accepted onto a PhD program at Washington State University and relocated to Pullman in the summer of 2022. He applied for an internship with the Pullman Police Department in the fall of 2022 and wrote an essay stating how he wanted to help local police better collect and analyze technological data in public safety operations. But he doesn't appear to have been accepted. Interestingly, one of his students, Hayden Stinchfield, stated that prior to the killings, Kohberger's grading style was pretty strict. He'd be grading you on what he ended up calling a higher standard. But what it really felt like to us was he was grading us like he would have graded himself as a PhD student. We were all annoyed by him. However, after the killings, he started grading everybody just hundreds. Pretty much if you turned something in, you were getting high marks, and he stopped leaving notes. Stinchfield describes Kohberger's behaviour after the killings as preoccupied, and that he appeared to be less well kept. The previous mental preoccupation that we had been noticing, where it was like he didn't really want to be there, that was at an all-time high. He just didn't look like he was doing great. Another interview with Rich Pasqua, who knew Kohberger in high school, alleges that Kohberger had a background of substance abuse, specifically heroin. Pasqua says, "I got 6 years clean now. I work in treatment and everything, but back then I was using. And so that's how I know for a fact he was using. I've got high with him a couple of times and used with him." Kohberger is a vegan. We have read posts promoting the theory that this was because he was deathly afraid that the taste of animal flesh would incite cannibalistic urges in him, and thus his veganism was a form of resistance against overwhelming murderous urges. This is vapid pop psychology at its worst. We have seen no evidence at all that Kohberger's veganism was a defense mechanism against homicidal or cannibalistic thoughts. What appears much more likely from the evidence we have available is that Kohberger adopted a vegan lifestyle, at least in part, to combat visual snow syndrome, which he believed to be caused by toxins. He posted online several times promoting various diet-related strategies to detox his body and treat visual snow syndrome. We have known patients in our clinical practice that progress towards veganism via various detox diets. At the very least, there is some evidence that he believed in detox diets to treat visual snow syndrome, and from there it is a short leap to adopting veganism. Going from veganism to suppressed cannibalistic urges is Olympic-level long jumping in comparison, and discredits forensic psychology and psychiatry. Kohberger posted online in his teenage years about his struggle with visual snow syndrome and the various symptoms he experienced. We are preparing a video about these postings which will thoroughly analyse them. For now though, what is important is that he alludes to impulsive behaviours, violence against property, and risky behaviours in these posts. These are important risk factors for future offending of the type that may lie at the centre of these murders. Kohberger's criminology studies are interesting as several serial killers have studied criminology or worked in law enforcement. These include Ted Bundy, who studied psychology at the University of Washington and worked as a counsellor at a suicide prevention hotline, John Wayne Gacy, who studied criminology at Northwestern University, and Dennis Rader, who studied criminal justice at Wichita State University and worked as a security guard and police officer. The frequent drives past King House raised the issue of a stalking component to the killings. This is bolstered by reports that Kaylee Gonsalves told friends and family that she had a stalker. Police have posted a statement about this to their website, which says, "Using tips and leads, investigators have identified an incident involving Kaylee at a local business, which may have been the stalker reference she made to friends and family. In mid-October, 2 males were seen inside a local business. They parted ways, and one male appeared to follow Kaylee inside the business and as she exited to walk towards her car. The male turned away, and it did not appear he made any contact with her. The department appears to have talked to both males who said they were there to meet girls and ruled them out as suspects. We should bear in mind that the department didn't explicitly rule out other stalkers or stalking incidents, and that this incident in mid-October may not have been what Casey was referring to when talking to friends and family. Let's examine stalking from a forensic psychiatry perspective. Simply put, 5 types of stalking are generally recognized. rejected stalker, resentful stalker, intimacy-seeking stalker, incompetent suitor, and predatory stalker. Rejected stalkers usually develop after the breakdown of a close relationship, usually a sexually intimate one. Their motivation is either salvaging the relationship or revenge. There is no evidence that Kohberger was ever in an intimate relationship with any of the victims. The switch to violence often occurs once there is evidence that the victim has begun another relationship. Resentful stalkers usually feel that they have been mistreated or humiliated in some way. They usually target strangers or acquaintances. There is a high prevalence of severe mental illness, often paranoia or other delusional beliefs. Their initial motivation is revenge, and the maintaining motivation is the sense of power or retribution that the stalker gets from creating fear in the victim. They often feel justified and a victim fighting back. They may readily admit stalking behavior as they see it as justified and expect others to agree. Intimacy-seeking stalkers usually feel lonely. They usually target strangers or acquaintances with whom they desire a relationship. This is often fueled by severe mental illness, often delusional, such as erotomania. Their initial motivation is to establish an emotional connection and intimate relationship, while their maintaining motivation is the gratification from believing that they are linked to their target. Evidence of the victim embarking on another relationship can trigger the switch to violence. Incompetent suitors are usually lonely and lustful. They seek shorter-term relationships or purely intimate contact. They usually stalk for short periods and are blind to the distress this causes. There is often a lack of malicious intent, and it is often associated with autism spectrum disorder or intellectual disability, where the individual doesn't realize what they are doing is inappropriate and causing distress. Predatory stalkers are almost exclusively male predators and female victims. The victim is usually a stranger or very vague acquaintance in whom the stalker develops a sexual interest. This may escalate over time from fantasizing to voyeurism to assault and, eventually, murder. Usually the stalker feels a sense of power and control over the victim. They may switch to violence if there is evidence the victim has embarked on another relationship. It is generally agreed that the risk of violence in stalking cases is increased in the presence of threats, a prior intimate relationship, the offender not being psychotic, the offender having a history of substance abuse, a violent history, personality disorder, lower education, younger age, and the presence of a revenge motive. In Kohberger's case, it appears that he is not grossly psychotic, does have a history of substance abuse, has had episodes of impulsive violence in the past, and is relatively young. There may also be a revenge motive if he felt slighted by his victim rejecting him or being in a relationship with someone else, combined with many reports that he was socially awkward at times, and this makes for a relatively convincing profile for a stalker. It is important to clarify what we mean when we say he doesn't appear grossly psychotic. This means we aren't outruling more subtle psychoses like delusional disorders, specifically erotomania, whilst stating that he isn't obviously psychotic in terms of obviously telling others of delusions or appearing to respond to hallucinations only he can see. In some samples, over 80% of stalkers had severe mental illness, usually delusional disorders, often erotomania. Many are questioning whether the attack was targeted against the house in general or one or more individuals inside the house, with the other victims being, in essence, in the wrong place at the wrong time. It seems clear from how the attack unfolded that the perpetrator didn't try to kill all individuals in the house. This points towards the likelihood of a more targeted attack. We know that Xana Kernodle had defensive wounds and was out of bed when she died, but that Madison, Kaylee and Ethan all died in bed. It doesn't make sense to go up to the third floor and kill Madison and Kaylee in their bed if the target were either Xana or Ethan. If the perpetrator wanted to eliminate potential witnesses, then killing Madison and Kaylee on the third floor, but leaving DM alive on the second floor makes little sense. It seems more likely that the target was either Kaylee or Madison, and that Xana was a potential witness whom the perpetrator decided to eliminate, causing them then to also kill Ethan as Ethan lay in bed. Given Kaylee's reports of stalking behaviour and the details disclosed to her father about the extent of her injuries, it seems reasonable to speculate that she may have been the original target and the other three were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. For those unaware, the Latah County coroner stated to Kaylee's father, Steve, that, "Sir, I don't think stabs is the right word. It was like tears, like this was a strong weapon, not like a stab. She said these were big open gouges. She said it was quick. These weren't something where you were going to be able to call 911. They were not going to slowly bleed out." The main illnesses which tend to lie behind these sorts of killings, in my experience, are psychopathy, delusional disorder, most commonly erotomania leading to stalking, schizotypal personality disorder, usually with a leveling of psychopathy and narcissism, and autism spectrum disorders. We will have to wait for the formal court-ordered psychiatric assessments to find out more about Kohberger's mental state, but there is reason to believe he wasn't mentally well. We'll examine this more when we look at his teenage postings in our next video. Idaho State eliminated the insanity defense in 1982 after John Hinckley was found not guilty by reason of insanity of attempting to assassinate the US President Ronald Reagan. Essentially, in Idaho, a person's mental health can be taken into account when assessing the perpetrator's ability to form the intent to commit the crime. If they couldn't form the intent to commit a crime, then they can plead insanity. If, on the other hand, they knew what they were doing, even if driven to do so by psychosis, they cannot plead insanity. As Justice Breyer wrote in his dissenting opinion in the case of Delling v. Idaho in 2012, Idaho law would distinguish the following two cases. Case 1. The defendant, due to insanity, believes that the victim is a wolf. He shoots and kills the victim. Case 2. The defendant, due to insanity, believes that a wolf, a supernatural figure, has ordered him to kill the victim. In Case 1, the defendant does not know he has killed a human being, and his insanity negates the mental element necessary to commit the crime. In Case 2, the defendant has intentionally killed the victim, whom he knows as a human being. He possesses the necessary mens rea. In both cases, the defendant is unable, due to insanity, to appreciate the true quality of his act, and therefore unable to perceive that it is wrong. But, in Idaho, the defendant in Case 1 could defend the charge by arguing that he lacked the mens rea, whereas the defendant in Case 2 would not be able to raise a defense based on his mental illness. If Kohberger is the perpetrator, there is nothing in his conduct after the killings which argues that he didn't appreciate the nature of the crimes. In fact, there is much evidence that he undertook a calculated plan to remove as much evidence of his culpability as possible. Therefore, it is, in our opinions, unlikely he will find much succor with an insanity defense in Idaho. For those interested in reading more about Delling v. Idaho and the dissenting opinion by Justice Breyer, we have provided links to the relevant opinion in the description and pinned comment below. A lot of discussion has focused on DM's actions after seeing the perpetrator walking past her and the delay in calling the police. We have all probably heard of the fight or flight response. In reality, it is more complex than that, and there are 5 common reactions to any trauma: fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or flop. Freeze is a freezing in place and has been reported in many disasters, with people reported to be rooted to the spot while the ship they're on sinks. The fawn response involves meekly complying with a perpetrator's requests. The flop response is a mental and physical collapse which can occur in response to trauma. Between the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and flop response, and the fact that she may have been intoxicated by alcohol or other substances, we should allow DM the benefit of the doubt. Any of us may behave just as bizarrely in similarly shocking situations. The mind is a wonderful, but sometimes strange land. The question of whether or not this was the perpetrator's first offence has arisen. It is highly unusual to begin an offending career with a quadruple homicide. With that said, we don't believe that a quadruple homicide was in the perpetrator's plan. We think it is more likely that a single homicide was the plan, and 3 others were in the wrong place at the wrong time. With that said, it is appropriate for any law enforcement agency responsible for an area where Kohberger previously lived to look at their cold cases and run his DNA against any of those cases. Unfounded allegations are rife. According to Penguin Z0, one TikToker is seemingly being sued after conducting tarot card readings implicating a professor. Honestly, whatever happened to the standard of evidence people are willing to accept? Even with more precise information than AT&T towers generally provide, cellular tower-based cell phone tracking is imprecise. This has led to a number of convictions being overturned in America and elsewhere. In fact, in Denmark, some 32 prisoners were released when flaws in this data cast doubt on their convictions. A smart lawyer would lean into this to introduce doubt as to the reliability of this data in this case. Even if the defending lawyer has to concede the data, we can imagine a crafty defender coming up with a defense whereby someone stole the phone, committed the murders, and then returned it, with Kohberger being none the wiser in an effort to frame him. At that point, the defending lawyer would, undoubtedly, be stretching the reasonableness of reasonable doubt, though. In terms of the DNA, we think the best bet would be to argue that the abandoned DNA used for the YSTR testing wasn't actually abandoned. This could make any downstream evidence gathered on the basis of a warrant issued on the strength of the YSTR match inadmissible. We expect that the law enforcement will have been very certain to establish that any DNA emanating from the Kohberger family home was provably abandoned before taking it into evidence, so this shouldn't be an issue. If you are finding this video educational and interesting, please like it and consider subscribing to our Crime and Psychiatry channel for future updates on this case and our coverage of other forensic psychiatry cases. Before we conclude this video, we want to take a moment to remember the most important people in this video: Kaylee, Madison, Zana, and Ethan, as well as the survivors BF and DM. Our thoughts go to them and their family and friends. We would also like to remind everyone that the most important thing now is apprehending and jailing the person or people responsible. That may be Bryan Kohberger, or it may not. That is up to the courts to decide. And while there is what appears to be quite damning circumstantial evidence, there is a presumption of innocence, and Kohberger is entitled to that until prosecuted and found guilty in a court of law. We are working on a thorough review of Kohberger's mental health as revealed in his online history, and aim to release that video next week. If you'd like to be informed when that's released, please hit the subscribe button so you'll be notified. If you would like to read further about some of the legal, forensic, or psychiatric and medical issues raised in this video, we have included a partial list of references in the description and pinned comments for you to refer to. We would like to invite you to discuss this case and ask questions in the comments section, but we would like to remind everyone to be respectful of each other, the victims, and their families at all times. With that said, take care and stay safe.